This is the second physiology lecture, chapter 63 from exam 3 test block. This is about the propulsion and mixing of food. First off, when you, basically an outline of this is going to be swallowing, then it's going to be the esophageal passage, so it goes down through here. Then it's going to be the control of peristalsis, which is those movements that push the food down. Then it's going to be talking about the gastric mixing, and then the passage of the food through the pyloric sphincter, and how that is initiated and how it's controlled. Then it's going to cover the peristalsis in the small intestine, and then the mixing and propulsion in the large intestine, and also lastly we covered a little bit about vomiting as well. So to start off, when a person swallows something, the food is detected in here, and it's picked up by the glossopharyngeal and the trigeminal nerve, which travel up to a part of the medulla called the tractus solitarius. And that is kind of what starts this whole digestion process, those neurons originally. And there's actually some steps in swallowing. What happens is the tongue will push the food against the anterior pharynx. That's up here. So the tongue pushes the food against this, and the soft palate, which is this part here, kind of pulls forward and closes off these nares, this nose hole right here. Then, on the inside, then the sides of the pharynx, so like this, are going to contract towards the midline, and the upper esophageal sphincter, which is like, I don't know, wherever, probably like right there. I'm not really sure where that is, to be honest with you. Upper esophageal sphincter, okay, there it is. The upper esophageal sphincter relaxes so that the food can get pushed down, and that enlarges the opening of the esophagus. The vocal cords are going to close, so it closes off the stuff that go to your lungs. And the larynx pulls the food forward and upward, kind of allowing it to go down and in. And that moves the epiglottis down over the glottis, and the entire pharynx is going to then contract, and the food is pushed into the esophagus. The esophagus, I guess this primary peristalsis, from the primary peristalsis of the esophagus to the stomach, this takes about 6 to 10 seconds for the food to get from here to here. The secondary peristalsis reflex is controlled by the myenteric plexi. It responds to stretching of the esophagus. So if the food gets in here and starts to get stretched, this myenteric plexi will detect those pushing movements, and it will cause the peristalsis, that contracting, to occur. The peristalsis is both in the primary, it's primarily directed, these peristaltic contractions, they are initiated by the myenteric plexi order, but it's the vagus nerve that actually apparently usually controls these contractions. And if the vagus, though, is taken out, then the myenteric plexi can take over. The upper 1/3 of the esophagus, like this part up here, is going to actually be skeletal muscle, which is muscle that you can control. But the lower 2/3 is smooth muscle. The vagus controls both the smooth and the skeletal muscle, but the myenteric plexi only controls the smooth muscle at the bottom. Typically the vagus actually controls both, but if the vagus isn't working for whatever reason, the myenteric plexi can take over and do just the bottom one. The lower esophageal sphincter down here is only 3 centimeters wide, so it's really, really tiny, and it's just above the juncture with the stomach. So here's the stomach, it's just above that. And in here is also the diaphragm, and that kind of helps close this off as well. When a peristaltic wave hits this sphincter, like comes like this and hits it, the sphincter opens up, and I guess the diaphragm must loosen as well, and the food can then go into the stomach. Excuse me. The stomach has a few parts here. I didn't draw this part here, but there's this part that kind of goes up, like after it goes in, it goes up a little bit like this. That's called the fundus of the stomach. The stomach also has these like squiggly lines that kind of allow it to like stretch and absorb more things, and those squiggly lines are called rugae. They're actually not squiggly lines. They're like internal ridges, It also has an antrum, which is basically this part that kind of goes down into this pyloric region. And at the end of the pyloric region there is the pyloric sphincter. And the muscle in the pyloric sphincter is actually 2 times thicker than the muscles in the main body of the stomach. When food comes in here, this distension of the food is going to cause the stomach to undergo peristalsis. And these peristaltic waves usually last 15 to 20 seconds. Also, in here is sometimes gastrin will be released from these cells in the body of the stomach. And the gastrin, in this case, causes an increase in peristaltic waves and causes this pyloric antrum to relax, which would allow food to go through. The food, as it kind of gets mushed up and everything in here, and the pyloric smashes it through there, it churns up, it turns into this kind of paste that's called chyme. The enterogastric reflexes in the chyme. Let me reword this a little bit. So if food comes in here, there's this thing called the enterogastric reflex. And essentially what that is if the food is really lumpy, like irritating, or there's too much food, or the food's like really acidic or super salty, like hypertonic, then there's going to be a neural reflex which will occur that actually inhibits peristalsis and will increase strength of the contraction of the pyloric sphincter. So in other words, if the food's really lumpy and irritating and salty and everything, this tightens down and the peristaltic contraction is kind of slow. And that's important because that means this food needs to be digested a little more and broken down a little before it goes down in here. There's also something released called cholecystokinin, and cholecystokinin is a polypeptide hormone that's released from the mucosa of the duodenum, and it goes into the bloodstream. And what this does is cholecystokinin is going to inhibit the motility of the duodenum, so it slows that down. It also is going to cause bile to be released. So your pancreatic enzymes and bile, everything are going to start being released in here. And also, cholecystokinin can also go up to the brain and send a signal that says I'm satiated, or I'm full, I'm comfortable, whatever, I don't need more food. Kind of gets rid of that hunger reflex. There is a release of cholecystokinin when your body detects that there are these really long fatty acid chains, or like really long amino acids, or if it just senses that there's incompletely digested food. So this actually, cholecystokinin gives your body a chance to break things down. If it didn't get the job done here, it kind of gives it more of a chance to get it done there with these pancreatic enzymes to break stuff down. Oh, by the way, also secretin and somatostatin also inhibit gastric motility. So we've got a couple here: secretin, somatostatin, and cholecystokinin. Those are 3 things that inhibit gastric motility. Whereas later on you'll find that there are also a few things that increase gastric motility as well. Like gastrin, motilin, and serotonin later on will increase that. So peristalsis in the small intestine is basically like the local stretching of the wall, and it initiates local concentric contractions. It mixes the chyme, and the movement through this intestine here only travels about 1 centimeter per minute in the small intestine. There's also something called the gastroenteric reflex, which is basically when there is the distension of the walls of the stomach. The myenteric plexi is going to increase peristalsis. There's also something called the gastroileal reflex, which is increase peristalsis in the ileum and forces the chyme through the ileocecal valve. So right here, this is the ileocecal valve. So if this gastroileal reflex triggers, it's going to increase the pushing through here, and it's going to push the food into the large intestine. there is normally a condition where, normally this ileocecal valve is closed. It basically allows food to stay in here longer and allows, the food not to get backed up from here this way. But it opens when there's pressure on that sphincter or whatever, the chyme stays in there too long. The haustra here are like kind of these bags. See, there's these circular muscles which kind of keep things from going backwards, and there's also these longitudinal muscles which push stuff up. So this circular muscles tighten, and the longitudinal muscles squeeze it out, and then squeeze the next part, and then it squeezes it out. But each one of these squeezing contractions lasts 30 to 60 seconds. And those little bags that those muscles create are called haustra. They create the propulsive movements. When defecation happens, the rectum normally down here is empty because there's this big turn here from the sigmoid colon into the rectum. And the myenteric plexi is going to, basically when there's distension, it's going to cause peristalsis. And the external anal sphincter right here is made up of striated muscle, and usually it is going to remain closed, but we do have voluntary control over it. So lastly, I'll also mention again, gastrin, motilin, and serotonin increase pushing down here. Things that seem to inhibit are going to be cholecystokinin and secretin and somatostatin. So vomiting is another thing that occasionally occurs. Vomiting can be from gastric irritants via the vagus nerve. Also can be from motion sickness by the vestibulocochlear nerve, or it can also be from pregnancy, and that mechanism is unknown. Basically what happens when you're going to vomit is that those slow waves, like stop, cessation of the slow waves, and there's supposed to be this onset of these retrograde contractions. It pushes stuff up. It starts from the ileum, and it pushes things up, tightens down the diaphragm, tightens down the abdominal muscles, and then relaxation of the esophageal sphincter and occurs, and then the glottis closes, and then stuff comes up. Everybody's probably experienced that. So the parasympathetic and motor input to the lower colon, by the way, it's the afferent fibers from the rectum that initiate a parasympathetic reflex which strengthens peristalsis. So parasympathetic reflexes strengthen peristalsis, and somatic fibers relax the external anal sphincter as well. And that's all.